The night felt colder than it should have in Lowe's Angels, even though the winter breeze there was usually soft and gentle. Sandra Bullock stepped out of her car near a quiet Hollywood studio lot, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she walked inside. She had received a private invitation from the studio for what they called a small Christmas gathering, but the message carried an unusual tone, one that felt strangely personal. It mentioned Keanu Reeves' name, but only once, almost tucked away at the bottom of the invite like a whisper someone tried to hide. Something inside her felt unsettled, and she didn't fully know why. As she walked inside, warm lights washed over the decorated studio hall, filled with soft golden tones of fairy lights and a long Christmas tree standing tall at the far end. The place looked peaceful, but Sandra felt a slow tension building in her chest. She had attended hundreds of events like this over the years, yet tonight felt different. She scanned the room quietly, searching for familiar faces, and that's when she saw him. Keanu stood near the far corner of the room, hands resting inside the pockets of his simple dark coat. He was facing away at first, talking to one of the set decorators, but Sandra didn't need to see his face to recognize him. She could recognize his presence anywhere. He had that calm, steady energy she always admired, the kind of energy that made chaos seem quieter just by standing near him. But tonight, something about him looked heavier. It wasn't sadness exactly, but something was weighing on him, something deep and old, like a memory pressing at the surface. She took a slow breath and walked toward him, her footsteps echoing lightly through the hall. When he finally turned and saw her, his expression softened instantly. His eyes warmed, his shoulders eased, and the smile that formed on his face wasn't just polite. It was the kind of smile people reserve for someone they trust, someone who matters. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," she replied, her voice equally gentle. "You look like you've been thinking about something for hours." Keanu gave a small laugh, the kind that didn't fully hide the truth underneath. "Maybe I have." They stood together for a moment, just taking each other in. Around them, people continued decorating the hall, adjusting string lights, preparing the small stage that would be used later for whatever surprise the studio had planned. But Sandra felt a strange stillness settle over the moment, like the entire room had faded to the edges, and only the two of them remained clear and focused. "So," she said finally, trying to read his expression, "what is all this? Why are we here? This isn't a normal gathering, is it?" Keanu looked down for a second, as if carefully choosing his words. Then he met her eyes again, and there was something raw and honest there, something she hadn't seen in him for a long time. "I asked them to do this," he said quietly. Sandra blinked, surprised. You asked them to arrange a Christmas event." He nodded once slowly. "Yeah, but not for everyone. The gathering is real, but the purpose, that part is for you." Her heartbeat quickened. Sandra wasn't easily shaken, but the way he said it, the weight in his voice, made her chest tighten. She stepped a little closer, lowering her voice instinctively. "Keanu, what's going on?" He looked at her with a small, vulnerable smile, the kind she remembered from their earliest days working together. "There's something I need to tell you tonight, something I should have said a long time ago, something connected to Christmas, and I didn't want to say it in a normal setting. I wanted the atmosphere to feel right, safe." Her throat felt dry. "You're scaring me." "No," he said softly, shaking his head. "I don't want to scare you, I need to be honest." And for the first time in years, Sandra felt the air shift between them, not in a romantic way, not in a dramatic way, but in a deeply human way. There was a truth he had been carrying, and he had chosen Christmas to bring it forward. She studied him carefully, noticing the faint tension near his jaw, the way his fingers curled slightly against the inside of his coat pockets, the way he took slow breaths like he was preparing himself. Sandra had known him through laughter, through difficult moments, through personal losses, through professional pressures. She knew the version of him that joked and played and carried 1,000 private burdens while pretending he held none. But this version of him, the one standing in front of her tonight, felt different. "Keanu," she whispered, "whatever it is, you can tell me." He nodded again, but before he could speak, someone called Sandra's name across the room. She looked back briefly, seeing one of the event organizers motioning her to come sign something. When she looked back at Keanu, he gave a gentle smile, one that carried patience. "Go ahead," he said. "I'll be right here." She hesitated for a moment before walking away. Every step felt heavy, her mind spinning with questions. What could he possibly need to reveal? And why now? Why Christmas? As she signed the document the organizer gave her, she kept glancing back toward Keanu, only to find him standing alone, his gaze lowered, his posture still but tense. He looked like someone rehearsing something in his head, something personal and painful. When she returned to him, he looked up again, and for a moment, Sandra saw a flicker of something she couldn't explain, like a shadow of a memory crossing behind his eyes. "We should talk somewhere quieter," he said. "Not here." She nodded quickly. "Okay, where?" He led her toward a side hallway, one that connected the main hall to old sound stages no longer in use. The lights there were dimmer, the air colder, and the space silent except for their footsteps. Sandra felt her nerves tighten even more, but she followed him because she trusted him. She had always trusted him. When they stopped near an empty dressing room, Keanu turned to face her, leaning against the wall slowly. He inhaled deeply, then let out the breath in a quiet rush. "Before I say anything," he began, his voice low and steady, "I need you to promise that you'll listen all the way through, even if it sounds strange, even if it catches you off guard." Her heart pounded harder. "I promise." He nodded. "Good, because this is something connected to the past, something that happened around Christmas years ago, and it's something I never told you, even though I should have." She felt her breath catch. "Keanu, what happened?" He hesitated, then his voice softened into almost a whisper. "I kept something from you, something important, and it involves a choice I made, a choice that changed how I saw us. But I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you, and because I wasn't ready." Sandra felt the room tilt slightly. "A choice about us?" He lowered his eyes. "Yes." She swallowed hard, her mind racing through every possibility, every moment they had shared, every year that had passed. But nothing prepared her for what he said next. "Back then," he continued, "I had a chance to tell you something, something real, something I felt. But I held it back, not because it wasn't true, but because I was afraid it would change everything we had, and I didn't want to lose what we already shared." She stared at him, unable to move, unable to breathe fully. "Keanu, what did you feel?" He raised his eyes slowly, and there, finally exposed, was the truth he had kept for years. "I cared about you more than I allowed myself to admit, more than I thought I deserved to admit, and I thought that if I told you I might ruin the friendship we had. So I stayed quiet, and I thought I made the right choice until something happened that Christmas." Her voice trembled. "What happened?" He stepped closer, and for a brief moment, he looked like the younger version of himself, the one who had once stood beside her on set laughing with the innocence of early fame. But the man before her now was older, shaped by losses and wisdom, carrying the softness of someone who had learned the value of honest connection. "I saw something that night," he whispered. "Something that changed how I saw everything, something I never told you because I didn't know how." Sandra's chest tightened painfully. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a truth that would shake her no matter which direction it fell. "Keanu, what did you see?" His eyes dropped to the floor. His voice grew even softer. "I saw you, not in the public way everyone sees you, not through cameras or performances. I saw you hurting. And I realized how much I wanted to be there for you, not as a friend who came and went with work, but as someone who stayed. I realized that night that I had been holding back something that could have mattered." Her breath hitched. "Why didn't you tell me?" He shook his head slowly, the weight of regret settling into his expression. "Because I didn't think I had the right, and because I thought I had missed the moment." Sandra felt her emotions twist painfully inside her. She pressed her back gently against the opposite wall, trying to steady her breathing. This wasn't what she expected. She thought maybe he had kept a career-related secret or something connected to a difficult memory. But this was personal in a way that cut deep. "Keanu," she whispered, her voice barely steady, "what exactly did you see that Christmas?" He lifted his gaze again, the honesty in his eyes so open and vulnerable that it almost frightened her. "I saw you standing alone on a balcony during that holiday event years ago. You looked like you were trying not to cry. No one else noticed, but I did. And when I walked toward you, you wiped your face and acted like everything was fine. I knew it was, but I didn't ask. I should have. I didn't want to push, and I've regretted it every Christmas since." Sandra felt something break inside her chest. She remembered that night, remembered the moment he was talking about. She remembered the cold air and the pressure she had been under, the personal grief she had kept hidden. But she never realized he had seen it. "Keanu," she whispered again. "There's more," he said quietly. And this is the part I've never told anyone, not even the people closest to me." She held her breath. "The reason I'm telling you now," he continued, "is because this Christmas something happened again. Something that made me realize I can't keep holding this in. I can't keep pretending it doesn't matter, because it does, more than I ever admitted." Her heart raced faster. "What happened this Christmas?" Keanu stepped even closer, his voice dropping so low she could barely hear it. "I found something. Something connected to that night years ago. Something that was meant for you, but I never gave it to you." Sandra's pulse stopped for a second. "You found something for me?" He nodded once slowly. "Yes, and when you see it, everything will make sense." Her entire body tensed. "Keanu, what did you find?" He reached into his coat pocket. Sandra's breath froze. Keanu looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. An expression filled with raw honesty, fear, and something else she couldn't name. "It's time you knew," he whispered. "And once you see this, nothing between us will ever be the same." He slowly pulled something out of his pocket. Sandra's eyes widened. And then, Keanu opened his hand. Inside was the one thing she never expected him to still have. The breath left her body, and before she could speak, he whispered, "This is the Christmas secret I've carried all these years." Her world tilted, and the moment before he explained what it meant. The hallway lights flickered and everything went dark. The hallway fell into instant darkness, as if the building itself had taken a sudden breath and held it. Sandra froze, her eyes wide, her heartbeat echoing loudly in her ears. The power outage was unexpected, sudden, and strange, especially in a studio where backup generators usually triggered within seconds. But in that brief moment of blackness, she felt something deeper, something symbolic, like the universe momentarily hiding the truth Keanu was trying to reveal. She heard him inhale softly near her, the sound barely audible over the hum of silence. She could not see his face, but she could feel the tension radiating off him, heavier than before. The object in his hand, whatever it was still hidden by the darkness. She lifted her hand slightly, trying to feel for him, but before she could touch anything, the lights flickered again, not fully returning but glowing faintly, like the room was slowly waking from a dream. Keanu's silhouette emerged first, his form outlined in weak yellow light. His hand was still outstretched, still holding something small and meaningful, something that clearly mattered more than he had explained yet. Sandra's breath trembled as she focused her eyes, trying to see what it was, but the dim lighting made it difficult to see the details. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice calm but strained. "I think so," she whispered, her heartbeat still pounding. "What was that? Why did the lights go out?" Keanu glanced down the hallway, scanning the shadows with quiet concern. "I don't know. Maybe the building is testing something for the event tonight. It happens sometimes. Or maybe it's just bad timing." Sandra exhaled shakily. "Very bad timing." He gave a faint smile. "Yeah, not the way I wanted to do this." She stepped closer, her eyes adjusting more to the dim glow. The object in his hand slowly became clearer. It was small, rectangular, and old, like something that had been carried, kept, and protected for years. When she squinted, the shape sharpened in her vision. "Keanu," she whispered slowly, "is that a card?" He nodded once. "Yes, a Christmas card." Her chest tightened instantly. "You kept a Christmas card all these years." "I didn't just keep it," he said softly. "I never delivered it." Her breath hitched. "You never delivered it. That means it was meant for someone." He nodded again. "It was meant for you." Sandra felt her heart tumble inside her chest. She stared at the card as her mind raced backward through years of memories, trying to place what Christmas this could have been. What moment in time he had written something but never had the courage to give it. She tried to recall any year when something felt unspoken, when she sensed a shift in his behavior, when their friendship felt almost like it was holding a secret beneath its surface. "When did you write it?" she whispered. Keanu lowered his head slightly as if the memory still stung. "Years ago, after that night on the balcony, the one I mentioned." Her breath deepened. That night, the night she tried to hide her tears, the night she thought no one saw her pain, the night she thought she had fooled everyone. But he had seen her, and now she knew he had carried something from that moment, something he had been unable to say out loud, something that had lived inside this hidden Christmas card. "Why didn't you give it to me then?" Sandra asked, her voice soft, almost fragile. He looked at her with the kind of honesty that stripped away any defenses. Because I didn't want to confuse you. Because I didn't know if you wanted that kind of truth from me. Because I wasn't brave enough. Because I thought I might lose you if I said too much. She felt emotion thicken in her throat. Keanu, what did you write? He held the card gently, like it contained something delicate. I'll tell you, but before I read what's inside, there's something you need to know, something I've never talked about with anyone. Her pulse quickened. What is it? He took a slow breath, leaning his back against the wall as if grounding himself. The reason that night affected me so much wasn't just because I saw you hurting. It was because it reminded me of what Christmas used to mean to me before everything changed. She tilted her head, feeling the emotional shift in his tone. What do you mean? Keanu hesitated, and for a moment, Sandra saw the shadow of old grief pass behind his eyes. He had always been someone who carried loss with quiet dignity, someone who rarely spoke about his pain unless asked directly. Even then, he tended to keep his heart guarded with soft words and gentle deflections. But tonight, he wasn't guarding anything. Christmas was special to me once, he said quietly. It was the one time of year when my family felt whole, even if life around us wasn't easy. It was traditions, warmth, laughter, everything that made things feel stable. But after I lost certain people, Christmas stopped being a holiday and became a reminder. It became a weight, something I avoided. Sandra felt her chest ache. She knew parts of his past, the heartbreak he had endured, the loved ones he had lost. She had always admired how he carried himself with kindness despite the wounds life had given him. I'm sorry, she whispered gently. I know the holidays can be painful. They were, he replied softly, for a long time until that night. Her eyebrows pulled together. The balcony night. He nodded. Yes, that night I saw you standing there, and even though you were trying not to show it, I knew that look. I knew what it felt like to hold back grief during the holidays. I recognized it instantly, and that's when something shifted for me. I realized that maybe Christmas could mean something again. Maybe, through you, it could be a moment of connection instead of a reminder of everything I lost. Sandra felt the impact of his words shake her deeply. She never imagined that her quiet, hidden sadness that night had touched him this deeply. And now, learning that it had reignited something in him, something hopeful, made her heart feel heavy and warm all at once. Keanu, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, you should have told me. He smiled sadly. I know, but I didn't know how. I didn't want to put something on you when you were already hurting, so instead of saying anything, I wrote it down. I wrote what I felt, and then I couldn't give it to you. Why not? He looked down at the card. Because the truth felt too big, too heavy, and because every time I tried to hand it to you, something would stop me. Fear, timing, life. I always told myself I'd do it next year, and then the next, but I never did. Sandra took a slow, emotional breath. And now, why now? He raised his eyes to hers, and the softness in them made her heart beat painfully. Because this Christmas, something happened that forced me to face the truth again, something that made me realize I can't keep hiding things that matter. I can't keep letting important words sit in the dark. I found the card while clearing out some boxes earlier this month, and when I read the message inside, I knew it was time. I knew I couldn't go another year without telling you. Sandra stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. Then tell me, please, I want to know. Keanu swallowed softly, the emotion in him too visible to ignore. With careful hands, he held the card between them. The paper looked worn around the edges, the ink slightly faded but still intact. He brushed his thumb over the cover gently. Before I open it, he said quietly, I want you to understand something. What's written inside wasn't meant to pressure you or change anything. It was simply how I felt in that moment. It was honest. And maybe it's still honest now. But whatever you feel, whatever your reaction is, I don't want it to affect our friendship negatively. I care too much about you for that. Her throat tightened. Keanu, nothing you say could ever make me want to lose our friendship. He nodded, but his expression still carried a note of fear, the kind of fear that came from revealing something deeply vulnerable. He slowly opened the card. The sound of the paper unfolding felt unbearably loud in the quiet hallway. Sandra watched his hands, steady but tense, as he revealed the handwritten message inside. She tried to read his expression, but his face remained focused, his eyes scanning the words he had written so long ago. Finally, he looked up. I wrote, he began softly, that I saw you hurting that night, that I didn't know what caused it, but I wanted you to know you weren't alone. I wrote that I cared about you deeply, more deeply than I had ever admitted. And I wrote that if you ever needed someone on nights like that, especially during Christmas, I wanted to be the one you could call without hesitation. Sandra felt her breath tremble. Her eyes stung with sudden emotion, the kind that rose too fast to control. She looked at the card, then back at him, her thoughts spinning in too many directions at once. "Keanu," she whispered, barely able to speak. "Why didn't you give me that? Why didn't you let me know you were there for me that way?" He swallowed, his voice becoming even quieter. "Because I was afraid that telling you I cared like that would hurt the balance we already had. I didn't want to risk what was already good, and I didn't think you felt the same." Sandra felt the weight of his words settle into her chest. "You didn't have to protect me from that." His eyes softened. "Maybe not, but back then I was still learning how to open up. I thought holding back was the safer choice." She stepped even closer, her voice full of disbelief. "All this time, you've carried that with you." He nodded, and the look he gave her in that moment felt like a decade's worth of honesty compressed into a single breath. "But that's not the whole secret," he added quietly. Her pulse stopped. "There's more." "Yes," he closed the card gently. "Much more." Sandra felt a strange chill run through her. "Keanu, what else did you hide?" He took another slow breath, steadying himself. "The truth is, that night on the balcony wasn't the first time I wanted to tell you something. It was the moment I realized how long I had been holding it in. The moment I understood that what I felt wasn't surface level. It wasn't passing. It was something that stayed." Her heart hammered painfully. What stayed? He met her gaze, and for the first time she saw a depth in his eyes she had not seen in years. Something old, layered with years of restraint and unspoken moments. "My feelings," he whispered, "for you." Sandra felt her knees weaken, her breath catching so sharply that it almost hurt. Keanu stepped closer, his voice trembling slightly now. "And the real Christmas secret, the one I never told you, is that there was a moment when I almost said it out loud, when I almost told you everything, but something happened that night that stopped me." Her voice cracked. "What happened?" He looked at her with an expression that was equal parts pain and truth. "Someone else was there," he whispered. "Someone I didn't expect, and when I saw them, I thought you had moved on. I thought you weren't alone after all." Sandra's eyes widened. "What? Who did you see?" Keanu hesitated, and then he said something that made her entire body freeze. "I saw someone come out to the balcony after I walked away. Someone who hugged you. Someone who looked like they were comforting you in a way I didn't think I could." Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Keanu, that was—" He raised his hand gently. "I know, now I know, but back then I misunderstood, and because of that misunderstanding, I walked away. I thought the door had closed." Sandra shook her head slowly, her voice thick. "Keanu, that person wasn't." But before she could finish, footsteps echoed from the far end of the hallway, quick and heavy. Keanu instantly straightened, his eyes shifting toward the noise. Sandra turned too, her pulse speeding up. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Someone was coming toward them fast, their shadow stretching across the dim floor as they approached. And when the figure stepped into the faint light, Sandra's heart dropped, because it was someone who should not have been there. Someone who knew both her and Keanu. Someone whose presence made everything more complicated. The last person she expected to see tonight. And when they spoke, their voice cut through the hallway like a blade. "I need to talk to both of you. Now." The figure stepped fully into the dim glow of the hallway lights, and Sandra felt her stomach twist the moment she recognized the familiar silhouette. It was Tom Hanks. He stood a few feet away, breathing a little more heavily than usual, like he had hurried across the building to find them. His expression wasn't warm or amused or casual the way he usually looked at gatherings. It carried tension, urgency, and a rare seriousness that made the air feel even heavier. Keanu straightened his posture, his eyes narrowing with quiet concern. Sandra swallowed, feeling the shock still settling in her. She hadn't expected anyone to interrupt, let alone someone like Tom, someone who was usually calm, steady, and supportive. But tonight, something in his presence felt different. "Tom," Sandra whispered, trying to understand what was happening. "What are you doing here?" He glanced between the two of them, his gaze landing on the Christmas card still held gently in Keanu's hand. Then he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as he stepped closer. "I need to talk to both of you," he said again, his voice low and firm. "Right now." Keanu nodded slowly, but his tone was cautious. "What's going on?" Tom hesitated for a long moment, searching for the right words. For the first time Sandra could remember, he looked uncertain, like he was carrying knowledge he didn't want to share but had no choice. She noticed the way he kept glancing at the card, the way his expression shifted whenever his eyes landed on it. Finally, Tom exhaled deeply. "I wasn't planning to get involved in this tonight. I didn't want to interfere in something so personal, but after what I found out, I didn't want either of you walking into something without understanding the full picture." Sandra's voice trembled. "Tom, what are you talking about?" Tom looked at her with a seriousness that made her heart tighten. "It's about that night, the balcony, the misunderstanding." Keanu's jaw tensed. "You know about that night?" Tom nodded. "Yes, and I know what you thought you saw. I also know it wasn't what you believed." Keanu looked down briefly, his grip tightening slightly around the card. "I figured it out years later, but by then, it felt too late." "It wasn't," Tom said gently. "It never was, but there's something you do know, something neither of you knows, something someone kept from both of you." Sandra stepped closer, confusion and unease swirling inside her. "Kept from us? By who?" Tom looked at her for a long, heavy moment, and when he answered, his voice was almost apologetic. "By me." The words hit Sandra like a sudden wave. She blinked, stunned. Why would you keep something from us?" Tom sighed, shoulders dropping slightly as if the truth itself weighed him down. "Because I thought I was protecting you, both of you. But now I realize maybe I only made things worse." Keanu looked at him with quiet intensity. "Tom, what did you do?" Tom leaned against the wall, clearly gathering himself before he spoke. "That night on the balcony, I saw what happened. I saw you walk towards Sandra, and I saw her wipe her tears when she thought no one was watching. I saw how much you wanted to say something to her, Keanu. I saw the moment you almost did." Sandra's breath trembled. "You were there, why didn't you come talk to me?" Tom shook his head. "Because I didn't want to intrude, but when you walked away, Keanu, someone else came out, and I knew you saw it. I knew the second it happened that you misunderstood what you were seeing." Keanu swallowed hard. "I saw someone hug her. I thought she wasn't alone. I thought she had someone comforting her, someone closer than me." Tom nodded slowly. "I know, and I also know that the person who hugged her wasn't who you thought it was." Sandra's eyes widened. "Then who was it?" Tom took a slow breath. "Her cousin." Keanu blinked, stunned. "Her cousin." Sandra felt her heart twist. She suddenly remembered the moment, her cousin Michael, who had been visiting from out of town, stepping onto the balcony quietly after noticing she had slipped away from the crowd. He had hugged her, told her it was okay to cry, and encouraged her to come back inside before people noticed. It had been a private, quiet moment between family, nothing more. "Oh God," Sandra whispered. "All this time, all these years, that's what you saw." Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes softening with the weight of regret. "Yes, and when he hugged you, I thought he was someone else. I thought I had lost my chance. I thought I had walked in too late." Tom looked at him with quiet empathy. "And I knew you misunderstood, but I didn't say anything because I thought maybe it wasn't my place. Maybe you two would talk about it on your own. But then time passed, years passed, and neither of you said anything." Keanu lowered his head, his voice filled with quiet pain. "Because I was afraid of making things complicated, afraid of being wrong. And when you started seeing someone months later, I thought the door was closed for good." Sandra felt her throat tighten painfully. "Keanu, that relationship had nothing to do with that night. I didn't choose someone else because of what happened on the balcony. I didn't even know you were there." Keanu looked at her with a softness that nearly broke her. "I know that now, but for a long time, it felt like fate had made its choice and I had to accept it." Tom watched the two of them with a heavy expression. "And that's why I'm here tonight, because something happened earlier today that made me realize this misunderstanding has gone on long enough." Sandra frowned. "What happened today?" Tom reached into his pocket carefully, pulling out a small envelope, old, worn, and slightly creased. The sight of it made Sandra inhale sharply. "This," Tom said quietly, "fell behind some old files in the studio office. I was looking for paperwork and this slipped out from behind a drawer. It was addressed to Keanu. dated the same Christmas as that balcony night. Keanu's eyes widened, his posture stiffening. What is that? Tom offered the envelope to him. It's something Sandra wrote, but it never reached you. Sandra's mouth fell open. I wrote something. Tom nodded. Apparently, a small note. Maybe you forgot about it because you never saw it again. Maybe you thought you mailed it. Maybe you handed it to someone and they misplaced it. I don't know, but Keanu never received it. And when I read the date, I knew I had to bring it here. Sandra felt her heart pounding loudly in her ears. She tried to remember that Christmas. She tried to remember writing anything. A note, a message, a card. Slowly, like fog lifting, a memory began to return. Wait, she whispered. I think I did write something. I think I wrote him a thank you note that night. I never gave it to him because I couldn't find him later. Everything was chaotic and I just put it down somewhere. I thought maybe I lost it or maybe someone else took it by mistake. Keanu stared at the envelope like it held the last missing piece of a puzzle. Tom extended it slowly. I think this belongs to you now. Keanu took the envelope with careful hands, as if afraid it might crumble. The paper was fragile, the ink faded, but the handwriting on the front was unmistakably Sandra's. Small, soft, and personal. Sandra felt her breath catch. What did I write inside? Tom stepped back slightly. I didn't open it. It wasn't mine to read. Keanu's eyes softened with gratitude. Thank you. Sandra watched as he slowly slid his thumb under the envelope flap, his movements quiet and deliberate. He unfolded the small piece of paper inside, scanning it with a slowing breath. The silence in the hallway grew thick, almost overwhelming. What does it say? Sandra whispered. Keanu looked up at her, eyes glimmering with emotion. You wrote, he said softly, voice unsteady, that you were feeling overwhelmed that night, that you didn't want anyone to see you crying because you didn't want people to worry about you. But you said you saw me earlier and that you wished I had stayed. You wrote that seeing me made you feel safe, that you didn't know why, but that it mattered. Sandra pressed a hand to her mouth, shocked by her own forgotten honesty. I wrote that. Keanu nodded, yes. She felt her knees weaken. Tom stepped beside them, silent, giving them space as the truth settled. Keanu read more quietly. You wrote that you were grateful I always made difficult moments easier. That Christmas felt less lonely because I was there. And that you hoped, one day, you'd be brave enough to tell me something important. Her heart thundered. I wrote that last part. Keanu nodded again, his voice softer now. Yes, but you didn't say what the important thing was. Sandra looked down, trying to remember the depth of what she had felt that night. Then, slowly, the truth resurfaced. She remembered the sadness, the loneliness, and the confusing warmth she felt when she had seen him earlier in the evening. She remembered wanting to say something but not having the courage. Keanu folded the letter gently, his hands trembling a little. This changes everything. Tom took a step closer. That's why I brought it, because whatever you two decide, I didn't want this misunderstanding shaping your lives any longer, not when it never should have happened in the first place. Sandra looked at Keanu, her heart pounding. Keanu, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you saw anything that night. I didn't know you misunderstood. I didn't know I wrote something that never reached you. He shook his head gently. This isn't your fault, it was just timing, fear, and silence. Sandra felt her emotions swelling, overwhelming her. And now? Keanu looked at her with eyes filled with a decade of unspoken truth. Now, I think we need to talk about what we never said. Before she could respond, a voice echoed down the hallway, a staff member calling them urgently from the main room. Sandra, Keanu, Tom, they need you all on stage for the opening ceremony. Tom exhaled sharply. We're not finished here. Keanu nodded, not even close. Sandra's heart raced. She wasn't ready to face a room full of people after everything that had just unfolded, but there was no escaping the moment. Not yet. They walked together side by side, toward the glowing lights of the main hall. But right before they reached the door, Keanu leaned close to her and whispered gently. After this, I need you alone. We're finishing this conversation tonight, no matter what. The promise in his voice made her chest tighten. And when they stepped onto the stage, cameras flashing, the whole room unaware of the storm brewing between them. Sandra had no idea the next revelation waiting for her that night would be even bigger. The bright light of the stage hit Sandra's eyes the moment she stepped through the curtains. For a second, she squinted, feeling almost blinded after the dim silence of the hallway where her world had just been shaken apart. Applause echoed through the hall as the audience rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and calling names. The sound felt like a wave flooding her senses, overwhelming and strangely distant, as if the room were miles away even though she stood right in front of it. Keanu walked beside her, calm on the surface but carrying an invisible weight she could feel even without looking directly at him. His hand brushed lightly against hers as they took their places on stage, a gesture so subtle no one else would notice, yet powerful enough to steady her shaking breath. Tom stood on her other side, giving her a reassuring nod before stepping forward to address the crowd. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," Tom said warmly, his voice carrying across the studio hall. "This is our annual Christmas celebration, a night filled with gratitude, reflection, and a little bit of magic." The audience laughed softly at his familiar charm, unaware of the storm lingering behind the three people standing at the front of the stage. Sandra forced a gentle smile, even though her mind spun wildly with everything that had happened not even 10 minutes ago. A Christmas card Keanu never gave her. A letter she wrote that he never received. A misunderstanding that shaped years of silence. And feelings old, tangled, real, finally rising to the surface. Her heart throbbed inside her chest like it was trying to climb out. Keanu glanced at her quietly just for a moment, but the look in his eyes was enough to make her legs weak. She couldn't read everything in that look, but she could feel the intention. He meant what he said earlier. They weren't done, not even close. While Tom continued speaking, thanking studio staff and cast members, Sandra's focus drifted to the crowd. People smiled, talked quietly, and took photos. The stage lights glowed in warm red and gold tones, reflecting off ornaments, garlands, and the tall Christmas tree at center stage. The atmosphere felt festive and hopeful, a stark contrast to the heavy truth hanging over her. Then she felt it, a quiet shift in the air beside her. Keanu stepped forward slightly, his hand reaching for the microphone Tom had just set down. Tom looked at him in surprise, but Keanu's expression made it clear he needed a moment. Sandra watched him, her breath caught in her throat, uncertain of what he was about to do. Keanu lifted the microphone slowly, scanning the audience with calm, steady eyes. He stood there for a moment, letting the room settle. The lights softened around him, casting shadows that made his features look even more thoughtful. "I wasn't planning to make a speech tonight," he began softly, his voice holding a quiet depth that pulled the entire room into silence. "But Christmas has always been a time of reflection for me. A time when I think about the people who have brought light into my life, even in the hard moments." Sandra's pulse raced. He continued, "And tonight feels like the right moment to share something." Tom shot him a cautious glance. Sandra felt tension spread through her shoulders. Whatever Keanu was about to say, it wasn't part of the program, and based on the tremor in his voice, it wasn't lighthearted either. Keanu breathed in slowly, grounding himself. The holidays mean something different to each of us. For some, it's joy. For some, it's memories. And for some, it's a reminder of the people who have carried us through the years, even when we didn't know how to say certain things out loud. Sandra's chest tightened painfully. She knew instinctively that his words were aimed at her, not the crowd. "This year," he continued gently, "I found something that reminded me of the importance of saying the things we keep inside. Sometimes we assume we have time. We assume the right moment will come later, but life has a way of showing us that honesty can't always wait." Sandra felt her throat close. The Christmas card, her lost letter, their silence, everything connected. Keanu lowered his eyes briefly before lifting them again, filled with a vulnerable clarity Sandra hadn't seen in years. "And sometimes," he said softly, "the people who mean the most to us are the ones we fail to open up to, not because we don't care, but because we care too much." The crowd murmured gently, reacting to the sincerity in his voice, but Sandra barely heard them. Every word he spoke felt directed solely at her, like he was unwrapping truths they had avoided for far too long. Before he could continue, a stage assistant stepped forward quietly and whispered something to Tom. Tom frowned, nodded once, and signaled to Keanu that they needed to wrap up the speech. Keanu nodded back, calm and respectful, even though Sandra could sense he had more to say. "Thank you," he finished quietly, "and Merry Christmas." The room erupted into applause. Keanu stepped back, handing the microphone off as the music began to play and the ceremony transitioned into its next segment. Tom moved forward to guide the flow of the event, but Sandra barely registered his words. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. She turned toward Keanu just as he looked toward her. The moment their eyes met, the noise of the room faded. Everything slowed, everything sharpened. "We need to talk," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yeah," he replied softly, "we do." But before they could step away, a group of event organizers approached them, guiding them toward the press area near the side of the stage for photographs. Sandra felt her anxiety spike, but she forced herself to follow. Keanu stayed close beside her, his presence steady, almost protective. The flashes of the cameras were blinding. Photographers called out, "Sandra, over here." Keanu smiled. Closer together. They stood side by side, smiling politely for the photos, both of them holding everything in, both feeling the weight of truths unspoken, both waiting for the moment they could escape and continue the conversation that had been interrupted far too many times. As another flash went off, Keanu leaned slightly toward Sandra, his voice low and almost inaudible under the noise. "After this, meet me backstage." She nodded, "I will." Then something unexpected happened. One of the photographers, a young man with an eager smile, lowered his camera and said loudly enough for those near him to hear, "You two always look like you're keeping a secret together." The comment hit both of them harder than the photographer realized. Keanu gave a small, polite laugh. Sandra forced a gentle smile, but inside her heart pounded. The secret was larger than anyone could imagine. Finally, after what felt like forever, they were released from the press area. Tom, noticing their urgency, subtly stepped in front of the organizers who tried to pull them into another group photo. "Give them a minute," Tom said firmly. "They need a break." It was rare to see Tom intervene with such directness, but tonight, he wasn't just a colleague. He was someone who knew the truth, someone who had witnessed their story unfold in ways neither of them fully understood. Sandra and Keanu slipped off stage and into the quieter backstage area. The sudden silence was almost overwhelming. Keanu turned to her immediately, his voice soft but urgent. "Are you okay?" She let out a shaky breath. "I don't know, everything feels like too much. The card, the letter, the misunderstanding, the speech you just gave. Keanu, I don't even know what I'm feeling right now." He stepped closer, his expression full of empathy. "I get it, it's a lot, but we're finally here, finally saying the things we never said." Sandra nodded slowly. "And that scares me, because it feels like something big is about to happen, something that will change everything." Keanu held her gaze, his eyes filled with sincerity. "Maybe it will, maybe it already has." She swallowed hard, her chest tight. "You said your feelings stayed for all these years, even after thinking I had someone else." He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "They never went away, Sandra. They changed shape sometimes, softened or quieted, but they never disappeared." She felt her breath tremble. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" His voice deepened with emotion. "Because I didn't want to become a complication in your life. You had so much happening. So many responsibilities, so many moments where you carried the weight of everything alone. And I thought, if I said something at the wrong time, I might make your life harder. I didn't want to be another burden." Her eyes stung. "You've never been a burden to me, not once." Keanu exhaled slowly, as if those words eased something heavy inside him. But before he could respond, the backstage curtain rustled. Someone else stepped inside. Sandra turned, startled, and then froze completely when she saw who it was. It was the last person she expected to see tonight. Someone from her past, someone connected to the balcony night, and someone who should not have been anywhere near this studio. He looked at Sandra and Keanu with a tense expression, his jaw clenched, his eyes lined with urgency. "We need to talk," he said quietly, his voice tight. "This is about what happened that Christmas and what I never told you." Keanu stiffened instantly. Sandra felt her heart stop. Because the man who stood in front of them was her cousin Michael. Sandra stared at Michael as if the past itself had suddenly walked through the curtain and into the present moment, carrying memories she had never expected to confront. For a long, breathless second, the room felt suspended in silence. Backstage lights hummed faintly above them, casting soft shadows across the walls, but Sandra's attention was fixed entirely on the man standing in front of her. Her cousin, the person who unknowingly became the center of a misunderstanding that changed everything. Michael took a hesitant step forward, his face filled with a mix of nervousness and determination. He looked older than she remembered from that Christmas years ago, more lines near his eyes, a heaviness in his shoulders, the weight of an untold truth he seemed ready, or maybe forced, to carry tonight. "Michael," Sandra finally whispered, her voice shaky, "what are you doing here?" He exhaled slowly, glancing between her and Keanu. "I heard what happened. Tom told me you two were finally talking about that Christmas, and when I realized how much that night affected both of you, I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore." Keanu's jaw tightened just slightly. He wasn't angry, but he was on guard, his eyes focused and calm, ready to hear whatever Michael had come to say. "You said you need to talk to us," Keanu said quietly, "about what you never told Sandra." Michael nodded, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. "Yes, it's time. I should have said this years ago." Sandra felt tension rush through her. She hugged her arms around herself as if trying to keep her emotions in place. "Michael, what is going on? What did you keep from me?" Michael looked down at his hands, rubbing them together, searching for the right place to begin. "That Christmas, the night on the balcony, something happened after I hugged you. Something I never told you because I thought I was helping. But now I realize I only made things worse." Keanu shifted slightly, his expression unreadable. "What happened?" Michael lifted his head, eyes filled with regret. "After I hugged Sandra, I went inside to get her water, and while I was walking back, I ran into you, Keanu." Keanu's breath halted for a moment. "You ran into me." Michael nodded. "Yes, and you asked me something simple. You asked if Sandra was okay." Sandra felt her chest tighten. Hearing this part of the story made her feel exposed somehow, like her past sadness was being replayed in front of her with no way to hide from it. "What did you say to him?" she asked quietly. Michael closed his eyes briefly, pain flickering across his face. "I told him you weren't alone." Keanu inhaled sharply. Sandra blinked, stunned and confused. "Why would you say that?" Michael shook his head desperately. "I didn't mean it the way he heard it. I meant you weren't alone emotionally, that you had family there, that I was there for you, but the words came out wrong. I said it the wrong way. It sounded like—" Keanu finished the sentence in a low voice. "Like she had someone else, someone other than me." Michael nodded miserably. "Yes, the moment the words left my mouth, I knew they sounded wrong, but it was too late. You just nodded and walked away. You looked devastated. I tried to call after you, but you didn't stop, and I didn't know what to do." Sandra pressed a hand to her forehead. "Michael, why didn't you tell me any of this? Why didn't you say something?" He swallowed, guilt heavy in his voice. "Because I was scared. Scared I had already made things worse. Scared that if I told you, it would make you confront feelings you weren't ready to face. I thought I was protecting you from unnecessary confusion." Keanu's voice was gentle but firm. "Protecting her from what? The truth." Michael's shoulders slumped. "Yes, I didn't understand the weight of what I said. I didn't understand that you two were on the edge of something important." Sandra felt a rush of emotion climbing through her chest. Sadness, frustration, empathy, confusion. So many years of silence had been created by one sentence, spoken without intention. She stepped closer to Michael, her voice softening despite the ache in her heart. "Michael, I know you didn't mean to hurt anyone, but you kept something from me that changed the course of my life. You kept something from both of us." He nodded quickly, tears pooling in his eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry, I really am. I swear if I had known what it would become, I would have said something immediately." Keanu watched Michael carefully, then let out a slow breath, his expression softening. "It wasn't your fault alone. I made assumptions. I walked away instead of asking questions. I held back instead of being honest." Sandra looked at Keanu, her heart swelling at the vulnerability in his voice. "And I didn't express what I felt either. I didn't tell you that I needed you that night, that I felt better when you were around, that your presence made me feel safe." Keanu's eyes flickered with emotion, deep and unguarded. "Hearing that now, it means more than I can explain." For a moment, the three of them stood in a quiet triangle of truth, the past finally unfolding in a way that made the present clearer. Sandra felt the weight of old misunderstandings slipping off her shoulders, replaced by something else, something fragile but hopeful. Michael wiped his eyes and took a small step back. That's only part of it, he added, voice trembling. There's something else, something I found, something I was supposed to give you both that night. Sandra blinked. Another thing you were supposed to give us. Michael nodded, reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket. When he pulled out the small object, Sandra's breath froze in her lungs. It was another envelope. Old, worn, with familiar handwriting on the front. Except this time, it wasn't her handwriting. It was Keanu's. Sandra stared at it in shock, her voice barely audible. What is that? Michael's hands trembled. This was yours. It was addressed to you. Keanu gave it to me that night and asked me to deliver it to you privately because you were overwhelmed. But then the balcony moment happened, the misunderstanding happened, and everything went wrong. I panicked. I put it in my coat pocket to deliver later, and I forgot. I forgot it was there. Keanu's eyes widened, disbelief flooding his expression. I wrote that. Michael nodded. Yes, you wrote it before you went to find her on the balcony. You wrote it hoping it would give you the courage to speak. I found it months later, and I was too ashamed to admit what I had done. I kept it safe, but I didn't give it to either of you. I thought I had already destroyed whatever moment you two might have had. I couldn't face the truth. Sandra stared at Michael, tears sliding down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. Michael, you kept something Keanu wrote for me, something meant for that night. Michael nodded miserably. Yes, and I am so sorry. He held out the envelope. Sandra stared at it as if it were glowing, as if it contained a version of her life she never got to experience. Her fingers trembled as she reached out slowly and took it from him. The paper was old, soft at the edges. Her name was written on the front in Keanu's handwriting, careful, thoughtful, slightly slanted. Keanu watched her with a mixture of fear and hope, his breath uneven. I don't remember exactly what I wrote that night. I remember writing something emotional, something I had been holding in, but I don't remember the words. Sandra looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. Do you want me to read it now? Keanu nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, if you're ready. She swallowed, her heart pounding inside her chest. Okay. Slowly, carefully, she opened the envelope. She unfolded the delicate paper inside. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and her breath locked inside her throat. Her hand flew to her mouth. Tears fell. She blinked rapidly, trying to steady herself, but the words hit her like a wave she was unprepared to survive. Sandra, Keanu whispered, fear threading through his voice. What does it say? Sandra could barely manage the words, her voice cracking with emotion. Keanu, you wrote that you were falling for me. Keanu's breath caught. The backstage room felt suddenly too small, too quiet, too overwhelming. She tried to continue reading, her voice trembling. You said you saw something in me that night that broke your heart, that seeing me hurting made you realize how much you wanted to protect me, that you didn't want fear to stop you anymore. You wrote that you didn't know what the future held, but you wanted to be brave enough to see where things could go. You wrote that you cared about me more deeply than you had ever told me. Keanu closed his eyes, pain and honesty and relief crashing through him. I wrote that. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes. Michael stepped back quietly, giving them space, guilt etched into every part of his expression. Keanu took a slow step toward Sandra, his voice soft and raw. If I had known that letter never reached you, I would have looked for it. I would have tried again. I thought that night fate was pushing me away from saying those things, but it wasn't fate, it was silence, it was fear and misunderstandings. Sandra felt her chest tremble as she looked up at him. Keanu, if I had seen this letter, everything would have been different. My whole life would have been different. Keanu's voice cracked with quiet heartbreak. Mine too. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Two people who lost years to fear, timing, and miscommunication, now standing face to face with truths that should have been spoken long ago. Behind them, Michael cleared his throat gently. I know what I did can't be undone, but I hope this can help you both finally understand each other. Sandra wiped her eyes, breathing shakily. Michael, thank you for finally telling us. I forgive you. I know you didn't mean to hurt anyone. Keanu nodded softly. Yeah, thank you for bringing it now. Even if it's late, it's not too late. Michael's eyes softened with relief. I'll leave you two alone. As he walked out slowly, Keanu and Sandra were left in the quiet backstage space, surrounded by the weight of everything revealed. The card Keanu never gave her. The letter she wrote him that never reached him. The letter he wrote that never reached her. Years of silence. Years of almost. Years of what could have been. Keanu stepped closer, gently taking her hands in his. "Sandra," he whispered, emotion thick in his voice, "there's still one more part of my Christmas secret, the biggest part, something I haven't said yet, something I didn't even write in that letter." Sandra's heart raced. "There's more." Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes shining with something deep and vulnerable. "Yes," he whispered, "and after you hear it, nothing between us will ever be the same." Before she could respond, the backstage door swung open. Someone stepped inside. Someone who had been listening. Someone whose presence made Sandra freeze completely. The last person she expected tonight. And when they spoke, "I think it's time I told the truth too." The backstage door clicked shut behind the figure who had just entered, and Sandra felt her breath catch in her throat. She turned slowly, and when she saw who stood there, her entire body stiffened. It was the studio director, Lena Hart, someone she had known for years, someone who had been present during the original Christmas event all those years ago, someone who had always carried an air of quiet authority, calm presence, and leadership. But tonight, Lena did not look calm. She looked tense, serious, and deeply conflicted. Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger but with sharp curiosity. He took a protective half-step closer to Sandra, instinctively shielding her from whatever this new twist might bring. Lena swallowed hard, looking at both of them. "I'm sorry for interrupting, but I've been listening since Michael walked in. I didn't plan it, but when I came backstage to check on the ceremony flow, I heard enough to realize I can't stay silent anymore." Sandra blinked, trying to process the weight of Lena's words. "Lena, what do you mean? What truth are you talking about?" Lena stepped closer, the overhead lights revealing the strain in her expression. The night of the Christmas event, the balcony, the misunderstanding, the note that never reached Keanu, the envelope Michael forgot, all of that wasn't the only thing that went wrong that night. Keanu frowned. "What else happened?" Lena clasped her hands together tightly. "I was responsible for something that I never admitted, something that affected both of you, something I have regretted for years." Sandra felt her heartbeat quicken. "Lena, please just tell us." Lena exhaled shakily. "Back then, there was a rumor going around the studio about the two of you. Some people said you were getting too close. Others said it might turn into something more. The press started asking questions, and the studio executives panicked. They didn't want a scandal. They didn't want distractions. They didn't want headlines they couldn't control." Keanu's jaw clenched. "So what does that have to do with us, with that night?" Lena looked down, guilt clouding her voice. "It has everything to do with it, because the executives told me to intervene. They told me to separate you two. They told me to remind both of you to keep things professional, to be careful about how people perceived your connection." Sandra felt a rush of shock move through her. "What? They wanted to keep us apart?" Lena nodded miserably. "Yes, and I agreed. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting your careers, but I didn't understand what I was really interfering with." Keanu took a deep breath, his voice low and steady. "Lena, what did you do that night?" She looked up, her eyes filled with regret. "I told you, Keanu, that Sandra needed space, that she wasn't in a good place, that you might overwhelm her emotionally. I told you to give her time before talking to her about anything personal." Sandra stared at Keanu in disbelief. "She told you that?" Keanu nodded slowly, remembering. "Yes, she said it in a way that made it sound like you weren't ready to talk, like you didn't want me involved, so I held back." Sandra stepped toward Lena, her voice trembling. "And what did you tell me?" Lena's voice broke. "I told you that Keanu was focusing on work, that he didn't want to complicate things, that he appreciated your friendship but didn't want anything romantic to distract either of you." Sandra felt the floor tilt beneath her. "You told me he wasn't interested." Lena nodded, tears forming. "Yes, and I am so sorry. I thought I was protecting you both, but all I did was break something beautiful before it had a chance to grow." Keanu ran a hand through his hair, the emotional strain showing in his face. "So we both tried to protect the other, because of what we were told, because of fear, because of assumptions, and because of silence." Lena wiped a tear from her cheek. I didn't know the truth. I didn't know you had written letters. I didn't know you had feelings. I didn't know your connection ran deeper than the studio assumed. I only realized it later when it was too late, and I was too ashamed to say anything." Sandra blinked back tears. "Lena, you should have told us." "I know," Lena whispered, "and I've regretted it ever since." Keanu exhaled slowly, grounding himself. "Lena, thank you for finally telling us. It doesn't erase the pain, but it helps us understand the full picture." Lena nodded gratefully, then stepped back. "I'll leave you two now. This is your moment, not mine." She turned, slipping quietly through the backstage door until she disappeared from sight. Sandra and Keanu were left alone once again, the room silent except for the faint sound of music and applause from the stage outside. It felt like the world had shrunk down to just the two of them, two people carrying years of misunderstandings, buried feelings, lost letters, and unspoken truths. Keanu was the first to speak, breaking the silence with a soft, emotional breath. "Sandra, I don't know what to say anymore. So much was kept from us. So much went wrong. But hearing all this, seeing the letters, remembering that night, it makes me realize something." She lifted her gaze to him, her eyes still wet. "What does it make you realize?" Keanu stepped closer, gently taking her trembling hands in his. "That my feelings for you were never a moment. They weren't something that lived only in that Christmas. They didn't disappear when life pulled us in different directions. They stayed. They softened, maybe, they hid, but they always stayed." Sandra felt her breath tremble. "Keanu." He looked into her eyes with a depth that felt like the purest truth he had ever spoken. "The biggest part of my Christmas secret, the one I couldn't tell you then, wasn't just that I cared about you. It was that I cared about you in a way that scared me, in a way I didn't think I deserved, in a way that felt bigger than anything I had felt before." Her throat tightened instantly, emotion overwhelming her. "Keanu, I didn't know. I had no idea." He shook his head gently. "And I never knew you felt safe with me, that you wished I had stayed, that you wrote that note. If I had known, I would have done everything differently." She stepped even closer, her hands squeezing his. "I would have too. I would have told you what I felt. I would have asked you not to walk away. I would have asked you to stay on that balcony with me." Keanu's voice dropped to a whisper, full of heartbreak and hope. "Sandra, I wish we could go back to that night." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "We can't go back, but we can choose what we do now." Keanu nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Yes, now is all we have." They stood there for a long moment, the world around them fading into nothing. It was as if time had paused, giving them a chance to finally speak the truth without fear, without assumptions, without other voices in the way. Sandra lifted a trembling hand and placed it gently against his cheek. Keanu leaned into her touch, closing his eyes briefly as if her hand carried years of healing. When he opened them again, his expression was soft, raw, and open. "Do you want to know the final part of my Christmas secret?" he whispered. Sandra nodded slowly, her voice almost gone. "Yes, tell me." Keanu took a breath that seemed to come from the deepest part of him. "The real reason I kept the card all these years, the reason I couldn't throw it away, is because every Christmas, no matter where I was, no matter what was happening in my life, I still wished I had told you how I felt. I wished I had taken that chance. I wished I had been brave enough, because even when life changed, one thing stayed the same." Her heart pounded. What stayed the same? His voice trembled with emotion. "You." Sandra felt her knees weaken. "Keanu." "You stayed in my heart," he whispered. "Even when I tried to bury it, even when I told myself it was too late, even when the world moved on, I never stopped caring about you, not once." Her tears fell freely now. She stepped even closer, her forehead brushing gently against his. "All these years, I thought I was alone in what I felt." He lifted his hands and cupped her face gently. "You weren't alone, not then, not ever." They stood there, breathing the same quiet air, the weight of years finally dissolving into something soft and real. Slowly, gently, Keanu rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes as if the moment itself was sacred. Sandra's hands slid up to his wrists, holding him with a tenderness she had carried silently for so long. "Keanu," she whispered softly, "what happens now?" He opened his eyes, looking into hers like he was seeing the future in them. "Now, we stop hiding. We stop being afraid. We stop letting silence win. We start being honest with each other. We start fresh, and we let the past go." She breathed in deeply, her heart finally steady. And what about your feelings, the ones you carried all these years? He smiled softly, a vulnerable, truthful smile. They're still here, and I'm done pretending they are. Sandra let out a shaky breath of relief. Mine too. He blinked slowly, his eyes glimmering. Are you sure? She nodded, her voice full of quiet certainty. I've been sure for years. Keanu's breath caught, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was from hope. Slowly, gently, without rush or pressure, he lifted her chin with the softest touch. Sandra, he whispered, can I? She nodded before he even finished. And in the soft glow of backstage lights, hidden from the world but no longer hidden from the truth, Keanu Reeves leaned in and kissed Sandra Bullock with the tenderness of a confession held for years. A kiss that carried everything they had feared, everything they had lost, and everything they were finally brave enough to embrace. When they finally pulled back, breathless and quietly overwhelmed, Sandra looked into his eyes and whispered, Merry Christmas, Keanu. He smiled softly and whispered back, Merry Christmas, Sandra. This time, we won't lose each other again. And for the first time in years, they both believed it.